distraction versus traction. And that is such a clever thing to say. And it's so obvious. And yet we don't all think about that, right? About sort of defining why we are distracted.
Right, right. I think it's important also to differentiate between a distraction, which people sometimes ask, well, isn't distraction good? Like, don't I want a distraction from time to time? No, you don't, because
Right.
by definition, a distraction is something you did not want to do. It's something that you is not what you planned. It's something you are not doing with intent. What you mean is a diversion. Diversions are great. A distraction is something that is an action that pulls you away from what you want to do. A
Right.
diversion is just simply a redirection of attention. So diversions can be great, right? There's nothing wrong with diverting your attention by letting your mind zone out, by taking a walk, by meditating, by praying, by painting, by watching a Netflix show, whatever it is you want to do that diverts your attention. Great, do it, but do it on your schedule. That's the difference. Don't do it when you hear some ping or ding on your phone. Don't do it when you're trying to escape reality because you can't deal with it or you don't have the tools to deal with it. Do it on your schedule. And in those cases, diversions are wonderful and perfectly healthy. So we don't want to vilify the diversions because they really do serve a wonderful purpose in our life. But it's really about the intent to do those things. Remember, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time.
So like take charge of your life sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. So the first step to becoming indistractable is about mastering the internal triggers. So that's the first most important step, is having the tools to deal with the uncomfortable emotional triggers, whether it's boredom, loneliness, fatigue, uncertainty, whatever it might be, in a helpful way that leads towards traction rather than distraction. The second step is about making time for traction. It's about turning your values into time. Because here's the thing, if there's one mantra I want people to remember here, it's that you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from. Think about it. If your day is blank, right? If you've got nothing on your schedule, everything is a distraction. So you can't call something a distraction unless you know what it distracted you from, which means we have to plan our day. Simple as that. This is no longer optional, folks. I know people say, oh, I like to be spontaneous. I like to have, just have freedom in my day.
Right.
That's great if it's working for you. Don't read my book if you find that you're not distracted. If you find you get everything you want to get done, if you find that you're fully present with your family, you exercise when you say you will, you eat healthfully, great. You don't need my book. But if you find that you're trying to juggle all these things and not getting them done, I bet you the problem is that you're not using what's called a time boxed calendar. And this was something I saw across the board in the hundreds of interviews I did over the past 5 years studying this topic, was that the people who don't struggle with distraction, again, they don't have a lot of willpower. They don't have a lot of self-control. What they have is a plan. They have a system. They sit down for 15 minutes a week and they decide how do they want to spend their time in the week ahead. And they base it on their values. And some of those values include spending time on oneself, which is great. The time I want you to plan is not just to do work. It's not just the productive stuff. It's also the play. It's the pleasure to have that time in your day. Because here's the thing, if we don't plan that time, then the important people in our life become what we call the residual beneficiary. The residual beneficiary is the person who gets whatever's left over, right? It comes from economics. It's what happens when a company is liquidated, right? When a company goes out of business, the debt holders get their share, then the equity holders, then the residual beneficiaries, they get whatever's left over. And we treat the loved ones in our life like that, right?
Yeah.
After we've done everything else, then they get the little scraps and slivers of time, our friends, our family. And then we wake up one day and we say, wow, how come our relationships are drifting apart? How come I don't feel close to the people in my life? Because we haven't planned that time to give to them.
Wow. Wow. Again, resonates completely, maybe even on a different level. Just we
Mhm.
spoke earlier off camera about healthcare and the fact that, I personally think it's broken in so many ways. And it resonates because on a different level, I would come home from a system that didn't work, that would suck the life out of me. And,
Mm.
almost your happiness, your smile would be sucked away. And that was the residual that I had for my family. And so when I recognized that and actually defined it, was aware of it, that's when I knew that I needed a drastic change. So
Yeah.
that really speaks to me.
Absolutely. And look, sometimes, so that when we feel, this goes back to the internal triggers we talked about earlier, the root cause of distraction, it's not the external triggers, it's not the pings and dings that we tend to blame. time studies show that the number one source of distraction is what's going on inside of us.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to dealing with these internal triggers, like a difficult workplace culture, like a family life that's on edge, you know, we only have two potential solutions. Either we fix the source of the discomfort, and sometimes that means doing what you did and finding, a different industry to work in, or finding a
Right.
different employer. That's not always possible. So the other solution is to find tactics to cope with that discomfort in a healthier manner. And I think this is where most of us do not have the tools we need to cope with that discomfort. And the way we cope is another drink, another
Right.
scrolling session, whatever it is. There's a million things to distract yourself and take your mind off of those uncomfortable triggers. The solution is either to fix the problem or learn healthy tactics to cope with the
Yes.
problem. And so that's something I think very few people learn. And it turns out there's wonderful techniques out there that are there for us to use. I didn't make these techniques up. What I wanted to do was to coalesce these techniques that have been around for decades, from acceptance and commitment therapy, from cognitive behavioral therapy. There's all kinds of techniques out there that anyone can use, that can be very, very effective at helping us cope with these internal triggers in a healthy way.
Again, it's going to speak to so many physicians that are going to watch this because of all the burnout that's happening in medicine. And I know that even large systems are looking for solutions in starting these programs and things that will trickle down to, the residents and the attending physicians in terms of solving that. I'm not personally sure that there is going to be an easy solution. And
Mm,
so again, what you say super resonates. I think
mm,
some of us just need to make drastic changes, and thankfully I was able to, and yet others can't. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen in healthcare, but it
mm,
definitely intersects in terms of something that's relatable to medicine.
yeah. I will add, I don't know if I can prescribe the remedy, to fix healthcare, but I will
Yeah.
say I know I can diagnose the problem. And this comes out of research that was done many years ago, out of Oxford, by two researchers by the name of Stansfield and Candy, and they found that there was a certain type of workplace environment that had a causal, not just a correlative relationship, a causal relationship with this, depression and anxiety disorder. That there was a certain type of work environment that literally drives people crazy. And when I first saw this research, before I read the results, before I read the conclusion, if you had asked me what kind of work environment leads to depression and anxiety disorder, I would tell you, a sad job, right? Maybe working in a slaughterhouse or being a mortician. I don't know, like a sad job.
Right.
No correlation. Has nothing to do with what you
Right.
do. Has totally to do with the environment with which you do it in, right? That's
Wow.
what matters. And it turns out there are the confluence of two factors, two conditions, that when you have them at the same time, this is what leads to depression, anxiety, and burnout in the workplace. It's the confluence of high expectations coupled with low control.
Wow.
Okay. High expectations, low control. Interestingly enough, if you have high expectations with high control, no problem. People rise to the occasion. They do great. They report flourishing
Totally.
at work. But high expectations with low
Wow.
control. I mean, did I just describe medicine in a
Oh
nutshell
my
right
God.
there?
It's sick. No pun
Right?
intended. It is sick
Yeah.
how accurate what you're saying is.
That's the problem. And so what do? You're not going to reduce expectations. What you
Right.
do is you increase control. And by the way, this is why, there's a whole section in my book that I talk about why distraction at work is a symptom of cultural dysfunction. Distraction is a symptom of cultural dysfunction, because what do people do when they don't feel agency, when they don't feel control, when they feel these symptoms of depression, anxiety, burnout, fatigue? What do? They look for psychological relief and escape. Well, how do you do that? You call more stupid meetings that didn't need to be
Wow.
called. You send more superfluous emails
Oh,
to
wow.
everybody's inbox. You do more of this stuff that not only distracts yourself, it distracts everyone else as well. And so that's why distraction is a symptom of cultural dysfunction.
Oh, incredible, really. Yeah. And again, we're not talking about healthcare, but just because I know that a lot of doctors are going to watch, just the applicability is just incredible. The fact that I do think that medicine is just a field where the expectation's high. So you're never going to change that, like you said, because
No.
we always have a lot expected of us. You go to the doctor, you expect to be cured or to feel better. So that's
Right.
never changed. It's the
No,
control factor. And you hit the
that's
nail on
right.
the head.
When it's,
Doctors are not in control.
exactly, more and more paperwork and constant
Yep.
phone calls and constant interruptions, that
Yep.
sucks your control out
And
of your
not
day to day.
right, and not in our control, as in much of that has always been in place, but the fact that admins are now in charge of us and are telling us what to do. The old days, at least the doctor was the boss, and so if the expectation was high, that was okay because we weren't still in charge. When you're not in charge and you have high expectation, it is not a meshable kind of work environment.
That's a recipe for burnout right there.
It is a recipe for burnout. And I think unless we make drastic changes, and I think that COVID is a time for us to really realize that, then we won't, healthcare is just going to continue to go downhill. But again, that's healthcare. I'm not going to focus on that because I know that we're focusing on the buck.
But hey, you know what? If we at least we understand why this is happening on a
Yeah.
psychological level,
Yeah.
then hopefully we can do something about it.
Well, I
It's above
agree.
my pay grade to know what to do about it, but you probably know better than I do.
Yeah. I mean, I have suggestions. It's just that I think we're so deeply entrenched in the way that things are already. And there's so many rules that are in place, and a lot of healthcare has to do with government and those kinds of decisions. It's not necessarily always in our hands. Also, when you're dealing with large institutions like hospitals, sometimes the doctor has less of a say. And so that's why a lot of systems are now buying out physician practices. Again, it's more of a larger control, whereas it used to be little control. The physicians were in
Right.
charge. I have so many questions. Everything was so natural. I didn't ask you any of
Yeah.
the questions I wrote. What social media apps do you think have a positive effect on our society? Like if I said, what would your favorite social media app be from the popular ones, like the Facebooks, Twitters, Instagram? Is there one in particular you really appreciate?
I think they're all great if we use them correctly. Starting with asking us as individuals, is it serving me or am I serving it? I think that's the most important question we have to ask with any of these potential external triggers that can lead towards traction or distraction. So I don't think it's up to me to tell other people what they should do with their time, right?
Right.
Everybody thinks that what their hobbies are worthwhile, but your hobbies, well, that's frivolous, right? Me on Candy Crush, that's frivolous, but you watching football for 3 hours, that's okay, right? Like, what's the difference? There is no difference whether it's Candy Crush or Facebook or Instagram. It's not the technology; it's really about how we use it. And I think what we see is that used correctly, these tools are wonderful, especially now. Like during this lockdown when we find ourselves having to be physically apart and isolated.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what going through COVID would have been like 30 years ago?
No, you're right.
No way,
Totally.
no way could
Yep.
we have done it. People, now we say about 30% of the workforce can stay home. Still, we have most people, 70%, they can't. They work in factories and food service and, service industries where they have to leave the home. But, whether it's kids who are homeschooling or us having this conversation on literally the opposite sides of the earth right now,
Amazing.
thank goodness we have these technologies, right?
Yeah.
Because it would be a whole nother ball game if we didn't. And so I think, again, it's about how we use these techniques or these technologies. If we use them in a way that serves us, it's wonderful. If we feel like we are the servant to the technology, that's when it's not healthy.
Well, that's what worries me. And that's actually interesting because it brings up one of the questions I had written, and that's to ask you about a world that I envision in the future, which almost looks to be a lot like Ready Player One. And I don't know if you read
Mm,
that book, but
yeah.
have you? It's a very,
I saw the movie.
did
Yeah.
you see the movie? I
Yeah.
saw the movie too. The movie didn't do the book justice, but the book is just so scary because to me it hits home.
Mm.
What do you envision a future in which we literally live in our computer? Because I do. So that's why I'm curious what you think.
Um,
I know you don't
no.
want to because you're distractible, right? But I
No, I
worry
mean,
that our society and our children, and that's it's a good tie into another question I had was just
yeah.
how do we raise children that are living in that are growing up in a generation that is very dependent on socializing through the computer?
Well, we got to remember that we already uh, we already have this in our we already have virtual reality, so to speak. I mean, look at Yuval Harari. I don't know if you read his stuff.
Yeah.
He made this great point that we already live in a video game, or at least the majority of people in the world do. It's called
Yeah.
organized religion, right?
Yeah.
If you do the right things, you get points, and those points, if you have enough of them, you can go to heaven. If you don't get enough points, you're going to go to hell. And so you better be good in this life, because there's this big boss battle, and then if you win the boss battle, you get to have 40 virgins, or heaven on earth, or whatever in the next life. People are already playing these video games. Why?
Interesting.
For one reason: to help them cope
Yeah.
with discomfort.
Yep. Yep.
Same reason. Is that healthy? Yes. Is it harmful? Yes. It depends how it's used. Religion can be a wonderful force for good, to give people meaning, to give them hope, to help to get them to help their fellow man. It can also be a very divisive force that separates people on ethnic and ideological grounds. And so it's really about how these things are utilized. And what your opinion of organized religion has a lot to do with your reflection on social media. That can it be used for good? Absolutely. I mean, look at all the amazing things people are doing on social media to respond to this COVID crisis. Can it be used for bad? Yes. Look at all the terrible things people are doing on social media to respond
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
COVID crisis. So it's really about how it is used. Will it, take over? I don't know what the future is going to hold. I don't know what new technology is coming down the pipes. I will tell you that today there's nothing close. That I mean, I've seen many kids who parents have told me are addicted to their devices, and sometimes there are children who have, like we said earlier, a pathology of addiction. 9 times out of 10, there will be obsessive compulsive comorbidity there as well. But the parents think, oh my gosh, my kid won't do anything but play video games, and then the parent says, hey, do you want to go play ball? Yes, they do. Do you want to go hang out with your friend? Yeah, they do. But
Totally.
these days, the problem is that we don't ask ourselves why kids are so drawn to their technologies.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's this hypothesis that we call the needs displacement hypothesis that has been around for 40 years. The work of Deci and Ryan. If you're familiar with self-determination theory, this is the most widely accepted theory of human flourishing. And they basically say that when we don't get what we need offline, we look for it online. And the problem today is, I think that we as parents don't recognize that our children are missing these 3 psychological nutrients of what we call autonomy, competency, and relatedness. That these are required for every human being to have psychological flourishing and well-being. We need these 3 elements of autonomy, competency, and relatedness. And when we don't get those things, we look for them elsewhere. And so when you look at the modern American childhood today, children are deficient in these 3 things, right? When it comes to competency, one thing we see in this country that correlates with the rise of the use of technology is also the rise of standardized testing,
Oh,
teaching towards the
absolutely.
test,
Yes.
standardized testing, Common Core.
Yep.
There is a subset of children in this country who are told constantly, you are not competent.
Yeah.
They start in I think it's Pennsylvania. They start standardized testing kids in kindergarten several times a year. So, what's the lesson that kids are getting? They're getting this lesson that they're not competent. So what do people do when they don't feel competent offline? Well, play Minecraft and you feel super competent, right? Uh, take autonomy. We know that autonomy, this sense that we talked about control and autonomy, how important that is for our psychological well-being. We know this is the most overscheduled generation in history. The work of Peter Gray has found that today, the average American child has twice as many restrictions placed upon them as an average adult. 10 times as many restrictions as an average adult, twice as many as an incarcerated felon. There
Wow.
are only 2 places in society where we can tell people where to go, what to think, what to wear, what to eat, who to be friends with, and that's school and prison. And
Wow.
so is it any surprise when our kids come home, they want freedom, they want
Wow.
autonomy. And so in our generation, what do kids do? What did we used to do? We used to go outside, we used to play, we used to hang out
Wow.
at the store, right? We used to do things that we want to do. Well, today, parents do one of 2 things. If you have the means, you schedule the hell out of your kid, right? Between the test prep and the karate lessons and the Mandarin and the swimming and the tutoring, kids have no time for free play, for autonomy, to do what they want to do. And so what do? They go online, they play Fortnite where they feel free. They can do whatever they want online.
Yeah.
For the other half, the people who don't have the means, what do? The media has so scared parents into thinking that their kids aren't safe outside, stranger danger, and all this rubbish, even though this is the safest time in history to be a child in America, that they keep their kids locked inside. Well, what are they going to do inside, right? They're going
Totally.
to play,
Yeah.
which leads to this third pillar, relatedness, that we know that we need to understand others and to be understood ourselves. Every human being on the face of the earth needs this for psychological flourishing. But the fact that kids don't have the time for free play anymore, which we've seen this 50-year, ever since we started tracking, this 50-year reduction in the amount of time that kids have for free play, which is time to interact with their peers without coaches, without parents, without teachers. This is where children learn their place in the world, but they don't have time for free play anymore because we schedule the hell out of it, or we don't let them go outside and just be free.
Yeah.
And so what's happened is that time has disappeared. Well, where do you go to feel relatedness? You go on Snapchat, you go on Instagram, you go on TikTok, Fortnite. These things are social media. This is where people connect with each other because they're so desperate for that sense of relatedness. So that's the root cause of the problem. It's their lack of competency, autonomy, and relatedness.
Well, what worries me there then, and that makes complete sense. What worries me is that we are creating a society where if you aren't then a part of those things, then you're not accepted. And I have a perfect example when Fortnite was like very popular. And it might still
Hmm.
be, I don't know. But I remember my husband and I both very much limited how much my son could play in it. I don't know if that was the right answer or not. And even today, I'm always struggling between what's right,
Yeah.
what's wrong. We thought he was a little young to play that kind of killing game and things like that. But he said to us one day, he said to me, the kids, they literally speak Fortniteese. And
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
speak it. He's like, because and so that's the struggle I have is you're right. But
Yeah.
coming from a family, my husband and I love board games. We love doing things. We love sports. When
Right.
the other kids aren't, so we could do that with our kids, and we do things with our children. But when the other children around you aren't doing it, how do you
You're
then
absolutely right.
socialize with them?
You're totally right. And it's the same thing when it comes to free play, right? The fewer parents let their kids play, the more parents schedule the swimming and the Chinese lessons and the test prep. That means fewer kids are out to play. So that means when the kid knocks on a door, their buddies
Exactly.
aren't home.
A
They're in
hundred
their
percent.
and so this is what's required. We have to bring back free play. The best thing you can do for your child psychologically is not the test prep, it's not the Chinese lessons, it's not the kung fu and the soccer. It's giving them time to play. And
Love it.
that might mean calling up another parent and saying, do you believe in giving your kid free play? Do you know about the psychological benefits of it? How about we have every Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to get together and let our kids play and do what kids should be doing.
I
And
love it.
it's unfortunate that we have to do that and make it deliberate and schedule time for it because it didn't used to be that way when we were kids. That's not the way the world worked. But today, because you're absolutely right, so many kids are not available to play. Find your kids' 2 or 3 other friends and schedule that time in their day. And by the way, there's nothing necessarily wrong with even things like Fortnite, as long as it's age appropriate. The studies find that 2 hours or less of this type of extracurricular screen time is fine. So if you have an hour or two of gameplay, as long as it's age appropriate,
Mhm.
nothing's going to happen. The problem is when it's really excessive, when it's something that the kids can't turn off because there aren't any kind of guidelines. So what I advise is to have that conversation with your kids, to work with them, to ask them how much time do you want to spend with these various technologies, knowing that the cost isn't that it's melting your brain. The cost is an opportunity cost. That's time away from playing with your buddies. That's time away from homework. That's time away from mommy and daddy, which means, ask them how much time they think is good for them. And you'll be surprised. We did this with my daughter at 5 years
I
old.
remember
Yeah,
from
and
your
even at
book.
5 years old, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
She could start saying, she said 45 minutes, and now she's 11, almost 12. She still follows that guideline. You know
Wow.
why? Because she set it for herself.
Mm.
It's not me limiting her autonomy. It's not me, big bad daddy, that tells her what to do. She made this rule for herself. Now, of course, I monitor. I know if she's abusing it, then we need to have a conversation, and she understands that. But by and large, she is responsible. You know, the important thing here is that, you know, the goal, I think, of parenthood is not to raise a child, it's to raise a future adult. So if we don't teach our kids how to be indistractable now and how to monitor this stuff and acquire this skill this century, when they leave the house, when they go off to school or they go get a job, they're not going to have that skill. And they're not going to be able to deal in a world where, you know, if you think the world is distracting now, just wait a few years. It's only going to become more distracting. So it's
Right.
imperative we teach them how to be indistractable today.
I super appreciate you hopping on. I'm going to edit this. And wow, any last words before we go? And this is obviously your book, just again,
Thank you.
Indistractable for those looking.
Yeah, if you're interested in learning more, my website is called niranfar.com. It's spelled like my first name, so that's NIRANFAR.com.
I'll put it below.
And yeah, I appreciate it. And if there's another offer that I wanted to mention. If you get the book, no pressure, but if you do get the book, make sure you keep your order number, whether you get it on Audible, if you like to listen to audiobooks, or Amazon or your local bookseller, doesn't matter. Keep the order number and go to indistractable.com. There's actually a complimentary video course there that will help you during your journey to become indistractable. Make sure you check that out as well. That's at indistractable.com. It's spelled I-N, the word distract, A-B-L-E, indistractable.com.
Perfect. I'll flash that as well. Thank you so much, and have
My pleasure.
yeah, and have a safe time over there in Singapore.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Great
You're
talking to you.
welcome. All right.
Take care.